Are you that person that says, I don't know how to do drywall mud, I don't know how to finish drywall, it's not my forte? I'm getting ready to change your perspective in this one video to show you how to finish drywall like a pro. In this video, you're going to learn everything from using paper tape, mesh tape, and how to use and the purpose of using different drywall knives. I'll show you the screw pattern that you're supposed to do when you're hanging drywall, the pattern that you use that'll be the most secure to make sure that the drywall stays on the wall. And by the end of this video, I guarantee you'll be able to go to your friend's house and correct any mistakes that they've made in their past of finishing drywall. So what I did, I demonstrated how you would mud and tape by doing this mock-up right here. And you can see from the top one, this is my first coat, which is putting the joint compound on. I used all-purpose joint compound right here. The reason why you will want to use all-purpose is because it's kind of like glue. This first step of adding the joint compound before you would add your tape is first applying it and spreading it. And so it would, if this is your wall, let's say you have your two seams, which we'll talk about the screws here in a second of how the screw pattern that you're supposed to do. So if you had your two seams, this is a factory edge right here. So you have the two beveled edges right here that are butted up together, and it tapers towards that edge in order for you to be able to apply the coat of mud and without it being bulging. That's why you use the all-purpose mud, is because it's like glue. So once it settles and dries, it shrinks, causing that bond from the paper to this paper here. And you never want to use any type of finish coat. I have another type that's called +3 that I like to use for finishing, but I would never use it for applying my first coat. And if you know somebody that's using any type of dust control like I have there, or +3, or any type of top coat as your first coat, they're doing it wrong, because it's not going to create a good seal. And that's why the paper that's right here would tear or come off, and it doesn't seal properly because you're using the wrong product. You will want to use all-purpose mud. So that all-purpose mud goes on first on top of your factory natural edges right here that's beveled. You apply that coat of mud, but you don't get too crazy with it by adding too much. You just apply a good bed of mud, enough that when you put this paper down, it'll get a good adhesion to the other paper. So after that dries, your second coat right here, this is what your second coat should look like. Now, you could go through and do like a rough sand, not too much, just lightly sanding before you put your second coat on, because the more that you sand, the better the finish. This is the second coat of mud right here. I don't have a whole lot on the top of this one. This is another bed of coat, which you will go over the whole top. You will want to feather your edges through all the coat. And what that is, you take the edge of your knife, press it against the side of the mud, and then you press it against the other side of the mud to feather your edges out. That way, the better you feather it, the less sanding that you have to do. And me, for one, I hate sanding. And so I don't put a lot of mud on it because I don't want to have to sand a whole lot off. So this is your second coat right here. Same concept, but you're not using a lot of mud. You just want to cover this paper on this one. The first coat is to get the paper to seal to the drywall paper. Second coat is to cover the paper. And then you can go over your third coat. And like I said, after your second coat, you will light sand over it. And then you're ready for your third coat. The different size knives that you would want to use. This is a 6-inch knife right here. I have a 10-inch knife. This one is a 14. They also have a 12-inch knife, and they also have a 4-inch knife that you can use for corners, because you wouldn't need something like this to go in a corner. You can use a 4-inch knife for it. This is where you can use your 10-inch knife for your third coat. Most people would just skip to this 14, which if you've applied a good enough mud for the second coat, it is likely that you can do your final coat with a 14. But if you just want to be absolutely sure that this seam is going to be covered, then you can do it in a 4-step instead of 3, which is coming over with your 10-inch knife, applying that third coat of mud, feathering it, feather your edges, and you're going over the whole thing with the third coat. And for your final coat, you will want to use this 14-inch knife. So this is where you're going to spread your mud wider than all of the other coats. And so After you're going to do the same thing of feathering your edges out on each side for that final coat. What I like to do, if I'm doing even on my third coat, I'm diluting the mud. And let me add that you're not using the all-purpose for your second and your third coat. This is where you want to use +3, or you can use something like dust control if you're not doing a big project and it's something in your house, which this is a DIY channel for small projects. You're doing something in your house and you can use dust control for it. So it's supposed to be some technology in there that to keep the dust down low, which if you're doing your finishing in a proper way, you shouldn't have too much dust. And the little bit of dust that you do occur, you can clean up. So you're using all purpose on your first coat for glue to bond the paper to the drywall paper. You're using your choice of a top coat on your second and third, but your third, you're diluting. You're adding water to it, mixing it up, and you're diluting it because you will want this to be more thinner than the rest of the coats that you put on. Because what we're doing is we're building upon this drywall. The more you build, the more that is going to be seen, especially if there's going to be a light shining in that area. Most people, when they hang drywall, they will try to hang where there's not going to be light shining on the finished work, because light is going to reveal all imperfections. On that third coat, you will want to dilute it because you don't want too much buildup. This third coat is just to go over all your area and kind of spread out the mud evenly as possible across the drywall, so that once you do another light sand, that is ready for a primer and paint. This is how you would finish a factory beveled edge joint right here. You'll know if you didn't put enough mud when you see bubbles, or maybe you have a wider gap than this. You will want your seams to be tight together because it's more easier to finish, and you don't want that paper to sink in. You want this to be flat and covering that seam. This is okay. This is not for a first coat. If yours look like this here, you're going to do a lot of sanding, and you're making the job a lot harder than what it needs to be. This is a light bed of mud sealed with the paper. You'll know when you don't have enough mud because you'll see bubbles in your tape, or it'll just come off, or it'll peel. You want all the edges to be sealed like this. And so that when you're going over your second coat, I can barely see the paper here. I see the paper, but I can barely see the paper. And this line right here shows that I feathered my edges out. And this is what you will want for your second coat. Your third coat, I don't see any paper right here, and it's pretty flush. This, honestly, I would put a fourth coat over, and I would dilute my mud and go back over it just to make sure that I got an even spread. Checking each side, gauging it to make sure that I got an even spread. And like I said, it's not going to be perfectly flat because you're building every time you add a layer of mud here. But you want to create this illusion that it's flat. That way, when you prime and paint, it looks like a seamless. You won't be able to find the tape line. So this right here, I demonstrated on this mock-up, this corner. And you can see how it started off with two edges right here that are unbeveled. These are not beveled edges. When you're doing corners, you don't want beveled edges. You don't want your edges to be the natural bevel edges like this, because it's going to make it harder for you to have that 90 right there. This corner bead has a metal in there that is roughly 90 degrees, so that when you press it against the corner, it creates that hard edge for you. And as you see, this is how it was as a corner of when you put the drywall up, screwing it to 2x4. Then you have this corner bead, and it creates this hard 90-degree corner right here. Same concept when you are applying the mud, like the tape. You'll want to put a good enough amount of mud to seal it. You're going to be using the all-purpose mud for this one. Once again, when you're starting the project, your first mud of choice is all-purpose mud. Same thing that I use for this corner, because I want to seal this corner bead to the drywall. I want to glue this corner bead to the drywall. I'm usually able to get away with 2, maybe 3 coats. But most likely I can get away with 2 coats because I'm not necessarily trying to hide anything. This corner is going to be hidden. If you put a good enough amount, you will want to put a good enough amount of mud on this corner. You see that this is pretty flush. I put a good enough amount of mud on this corner. This is only a second coat right here. And to define it, like I said, you can dilute your mud, put that final coat. It won't hurt. But you could get away with doing 2 coats. You put a good enough amount of mud right here. You're just trying to fill in whatever gauge that's right there from this corner bead to make it look like a 90-degree corner. I like to use snips like these when I'm cutting the corner beads. It cuts the metal really good. It has this angle at it. If I need to get maybe a 45-degree cut, this is a really good tool to use when you're cutting the corner beads. Now we're going to talk about screwing drywall on a 2x4. Most of your studs on residential homes are going to lay out 16 inches on center. And when you're putting your screws on, I stagger my screws. I didn't sink the screws too far deep into the drywall, but I barely broke the paper so that when I put the mud on, they don't pop. If you ever seen circles in your walls, maybe a new build or a home that's been there for a while, you'll see little circles in your wall and you wonder what it is. It's because they sunk the screw too far or the nail too deep in the drywall. And over time, it created movement, causing that the mud to pop that you feel to try to hide these screws. So on a span of 1 sheet of drywall, you will have 3 different 16ths in between that. A 16th on the edge, 16th in the middle, and a 16th on the other edge. 16 inches in difference between the 2x4s. When I'm screwing drywall to 2x4s, I like to stagger it. It's just for more structural strength. I like to stagger my screws. Anytime I'm in a field where there is no seam, then I'm usually 12 inches, 12 to 24 inches apart. Or if you're doing your drywall sideways, I still keep that same principle. Same for my corners. I like to screw 8 inches apart. Hey, the more screws, the better. Don't go crazy with the screws, putting it every 4 inches, but I would say 8 inches minimum all the way up. 12 inches, 12 to 16, maybe going up your field where there is no seams. There's another part of drywall where you will have 2, these are called bastard joints, putting a factory edge to a factory edge, or if you cut one side and you cut another side, put it together, it'll be called a bastard joint. And when you put them together, you're going to have to float it out wider than what you would have to do here on a regular seam, which I'll cover that in my next video. Another tape option that you can use if you did not want to use paper would be mesh tape. I do not have a problem with mesh tape. I actually like it better on some occasions because it's easy to just stick on a wall and apply your mud. This has a glue on the other side of it that you could just stick it on your seam and apply your mud afterwards. And it's real handy if you maybe want to do one side of the room and you stick all of your mesh tape on, you come back and then you mud and you do another side if you like to piece it apart. If you don't want to have to rush to put your paper on, because let me tell you this, if you put your mud on, it's going to start curing, especially with the temperature in the house. It's going to start curing. And the last thing you want to do is to apply mud and then have to scrape it off because you didn't put your paper on time. I'd recommend doing 1 seam at a time. And if you get some speed, then maybe 2 seams. And I've seen people do 3 or 4 seams at a time, applying the mud and even corners and different things like that. But if you're new to this, this might be your friend because you can stick it on and then you apply your mud and you don't have to rush. If this helped you understand drywall finishing a little better, hit that like button and subscribe. And if you ever struggled with drywall, drop a comment and I'll help you out and you'll learn how to properly finish drywall step by step, even if you're a beginner.